I'm trying to get center this so you don't get all my household mess in the background, but oh well.
Ah, that's okay. I've got lots of my own mess. Yes. So I'm here with Abby. How's the last name pronounced? Andresen?
Andresen.
Andresen. Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't saying it right.
Not Anderson, not Andresen.
And you're the author of Sangria Suzy from Not Just a Pretty Face, Women of Horror Volume 1. That title's a bit of a mouthful. So tell us a little bit about Sangria Suzy.
Well, it's about a late middle-aged woman who takes a new bus route to work and happens to go by this little old house that she recognizes as the house that she lived in college. And she keeps looking at it and looking at it, going by and going by. And finally, in the spring, she sees a for rent sign there. And she thought, wow, let me try this. So she eventually rents the house and is inspired to decorate it in 70s decor. And which reminds her of her year there. And so she elaborates on that. She goes a little farther back in the past and kind of tries to relive that time in her life.
Yes, that 70s decor just cracked me up so bad because it was my house growing up. I mean, the spider plants and the wicker furniture. And
Oh, yeah. Well, I happen to be a vintage clothing, accessories, and household dealer. So a lot of that decor is stuff that I've already sold. So it's meaningful to me because I've made some, profit from it. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that I even said this when I was editing the spritzer for the for the plants. My mother had one made of brass, and the water always smelled like the brass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember that? That's great. Yeah, this was stoneware, I think, and I recall little plants painted on the stoneware, the little brown plants.
Wow. Yeah. So of course my mother never had the murderous intent that Suzy did.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. Just relief. Well, she didn't really feel like she was murdering them. It didn't really occur to her. She's so deluded, I think, that she didn't want to think about what she was doing too closely. Yeah, she was so intent on her project of, reliving that year.
Yeah, she was a great character. So let's talk about some of the other stuff you've written. What else have you got out there for us?
Well, before I wrote this, I wrote a sort of a darkly comic novel called An Inappropriate Crush, again about an obsessive woman who is obsessed with has a really dysfunctional crush on a younger guy in the office, and she obsesses about him. So to the point where she has to do something about it, and she does, but it's more comic than horrific. And I thought, well, if I just expanded on the obsessive, just amped it up a little bit from comedy, it would become horror. So that's what I do with Sangria Suzy.
Well, there's a lot of comedic stuff in Sangria Suzy too. You start to think that there's kind of something weird about this woman, but she's harmless. And then as the story progresses, it kind of deteriorates more. But there's a lot of comedy there too.
Thank you. I'm glad you find it amusing.
Yeah, well, like I said, she's my mom. It's just
wow.
so funny. So what about horror? I mean, you said you write comedy, obviously, but what about horror attracts you as a writer?
What attracts me, again, it's sort of the flip side of comedy. You can go places where you really can't go with comedy. You can do crazier stuff. Like I don't really think murder is very funny, but it's kind of fun to write about. It's just fun.
Yeah. Hurting people is not funny, but murder can be very funny,
Yeah, yeah.
The quicksand and the
yeah, I guess so. Yeah. But I didn't set out to be a horror writer at all. It just is an extension of writing about obsessive women.
Yes.
Which I'm not, of course.
Well, I mean, some of us have our, crazy bitch side, I'm sure, but
Yeah, yeah.
try not to be. So you say you didn't set out to write horror. What did you set out to write?
More comedy. I was a stand-up comedian back in the 80s and 90s. And I got into that by writing articles about comedy. And I got to know some of the comedians and started hanging out with them. And I thought, well, I could do this too. And so then I stopped writing for a while. For like 20 or 30 years, I just stopped writing because I thought, oh, I'm not a writer. I can't do it. I tried it. I can't do it. But then I just started writing again when in my 50s. Just was inspired to. My husband is also a writer, and he's a bookseller, and so I got to read a lot of horror that I otherwise wouldn't have read. Like I didn't know about Shirley Jackson even, or although I've always liked Patricia Highsmith, I got to read more of her, and I've always liked Joyce Carol Oates, and he introduced me to a lot of old, like even Edith Wharton wrote ghost stories, so I got into that, and some other writers from the late 1800s that I like Oliver Onions. He wrote some creepy ghost stories.
It's always fun to discover that stuff for the first time.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, that's great. So you said you like to write stories about crazy women. Do you think that is detrimental to women, or do you think that it's a common thing? What do you think about the crazy bitch syndrome as we see it in pop culture?
Oh, I haven't really thought about that. That is something to think about. I don't know. It's just an aspect of life. I could write about crazy men, but I don't know as much about them. I'd write about crazy men if I knew more of them. If I knew more about them. My husband is very sane, so
Do you think that sane men offset crazy women then?
Yes, he's very grounding. Yes, I do. I don't think I'm crazy. I'm a little neurotic, but I wouldn't say I'm crazy.
Well, the more people I get to know, the more I realize everybody's kind of crazy in their own way.
Exactly. No, but I never really thought about that as being an anti-feminist, writing about crazy women. It's being humanist, I would say. I haven't really thought about it from a feminist perspective. I just haven't.
Yeah, true. I mean, you read enough sort of feminist texts, and they talk about how negative women being portrayed starts to look bad on all women. I mean, Fatal Attraction shows like
I love Fatal Attraction.
Oh, Glenn Close is fantastic in that.
Yeah, isn't she?
Yeah.
So is Michael Douglas, though.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about Michael Douglas because he kind of comes across as he really does think like some of his characters. Like seems like kind of an ass sometimes, but
does he?
But other times, as the put upon man, he was great. So sorry.
Yeah, he was great.
Yeah, and always that one last jump scare, right?
Yeah. It's a classic. I can watch that movie over and over again.
It's been a long time since I saw it.
Oh, I'd recommend it. It's interesting seeing it now, 30 years later.
Yeah, well, the one that I enjoyed with the commentary on was Basic Instinct. Camille Paglia did the commentary, and she talks about Hitchcock, and she talks about all this other stuff that you don't even notice when you're watching the movie. So I always thought it was kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, I saw that once. I don't know why I don't like that as much as I like Fatal Attraction.
Probably because there's more nudity. I think Glenn Close has a classier presence than.
You're right. Yeah, she's classier than Sharon Stone. Definitely.
Yeah. Although Sharon Stone is, she's gotten better as she's aged. I find she can laugh at herself a little bit more. Some of her roles are a little better. So.
Oh, I haven't seen her in anything lately. So I didn't know she was still working, actually.
Here and there. Well, this is gonna sound really bad, but she was in Catwoman, and her role was actually surprisingly good for such a terrible movie.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't expect too much. Like, it's not a good movie,
What?
but there's a surprising kind of feminist undertone where Sharon Stone's aging character. I mean, that's where the source of her anger is she's kind of getting less relevant as she ages, right? So
Oh, I like that. I
yeah,
like that
yeah.
tension.
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting subtext there that a lot of people didn't talk about when they were reviewing just how bad a movie it was. So,
Hmm.
a different kind of villain.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's move on. So you mentioned Shirley Jackson and some of the old Victorian horror writers. What other kind of writers? What other writers do you like to read? What are some of your influences?
Well, most of the writers I read are dead. I just read a lot of Joe Hill, some Joe Hill stories I've enjoyed. I like him a lot. I like Dorothy Parker stories a lot. Let's see, Patricia Highsmith. I just love her. Have you read her at all?
I don't think I have. I don't think
Okay. Have you heard of Strangers on a Train? That Hitchcock movie. She came out in the 50s. She wrote the novel.
she played the talented Mr. Ripley too, didn't she?
Yeah, yeah. I love that movie and the novel.
Yeah, I saw the movie, so it's kind of always been on my radar to read, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, I'd read it over again if I had time.
Yeah, I have such a long to be read list.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the other thing that I found interesting about Sangria Suzy was the setting. I mean, I live in a university town, and I've lived in so many of those student houses when I was younger. And so how do you decide kind of where to set your stories and how to draw that relatable setting?
Well, interestingly, when I moved across town into this house, my bus took me by an apartment building that I lived in college, and I thought, wouldn't that be bizarre if someone was crazy enough to actually do that? You know, I felt like I'd come full circle, sort of, because I'm sort of in the neighborhood where I lived in college. And I thought, well, I thought I was going to be a writer then, but I really wasn't one. Maybe I could try again now, you know, because it really felt like I was coming full circle when I went by that building. So yeah, I think just seeing things from the past, perhaps, that I can, you know, that I can relate to and think about putting a situation in, you know, just drawing from my experience in college, I guess.
Yeah, do you find that then you do use a lot of your real life experience and put it into stories?
The things that I have issues with, like I'm writing stories now about a job interview. I just finished a story about a job interview that goes very, very wrong.
Oh no.
Introduce a horror element into a job interview. Also, I wrote a story recently about a first date that didn't go very well. And so that's been, yeah, things that have I've had problems with in the past, things that have caused me tension and stress. It's fun to it's therapeutic to put them into a horror story, I think.
Yes. Well, we were talking on some of the other interviews about just how well-adjusted horror writers are because we get to fictitiously kill the people.
Exactly. I think that's true. That's true. And I do think that when young women go away to school, it's a very stressful time. And I think I've talked to a lot of people and have read some things that young women are so stressed out when they move away from home and go to school, you know, in a different town. And no one ever really talks about it, you know, that this could be problematic for you, you know, especially if you've led a sheltered life, you know, and there's, you know, all kinds of stress put on you to perform in school. And you have all these social, you know, issues too to deal with. So it's stressful. So
yeah, I remember, you know, the first year I was away at school, living in the dorm on campus, and you know, just a whole new life, a whole new bunch of people to live with that I wasn't used to. And yeah, you're right.
Right. You're thrown in there with them and you got to sink or swim.
Yeah. And then on top of that, trying to deal with the stress of the schoolwork. I mean, that's what happened to poor Suzy, right? She just couldn't hack it.
Yeah. She wanted to be a doctor so badly.
Yeah, and you feel bad for her. At least I did. I was
Really?
like, oh,
Oh.
can she make that test up or something? Come on.
Well, did you ever see that movie about this pianist, and he was all stressed out about he had to do the Rachmaninoff, and he couldn't. It just drove him nuts. A very difficult piece. I don't remember the movie, but just doing the Rachmaninoff just drove him over the edge. Just the mental stress of it.
I don't think I saw that one. Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell. No, I don't think I saw that one.
Oh, you might have, but I don't remember the name of it. But anyway, something very stressful that you feel like, it's do or die and you have to do it, can drive someone, over the edge, from what I've heard, of course.
Oh, poor Suzy apparently had some mental issues to start with, and then it just...
Exactly. And her parents, when they come to town, you can tell that they're drinking, and she's shamed by them, and at the same time she feels she wants to, is embarrassed for them. At the same time, she's loyal to them and doesn't like to see her roommates, dissing them.
Yeah, and her roommates didn't help for being so snotty. I remember not really fitting in with my roommates either. It was like,
Well, yeah, it's stressful. Have you ever read the Shirley Jackson novel Hangs a Man? I just read it. It's about a young woman, and I read this after I wrote Sangria Suzy, about this young woman who goes away to college in the 40s, and she's brilliant, but she has a mental breakdown, and you really don't know what it is you're reading for a long time, and then you finally figure out, okay, she's lost it. You're reading about a psychotic person. I recommend it if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I've read a couple of, I read The Lottery, obviously, and I recently read The Haunting of Hill House, but I haven't read that one. It's called Hangs a Man.
Hangs a Man, yeah, it's a game, that apparently they played back then.
Well, Hangman, right?
Yeah, but it's Hangs a Man. Not Hangman, Hangs a Man.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah. One word.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah,
it's interesting. I want to read it again, just because it was so perplexing the first time.
Yeah. Well, my all-time favorite novel is The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence, and there's a section where our heroine, she goes to school in the 40s. That's what made me think of that. She grows up, her childhood is during the Depression, and around 1940, she goes to school in Manitoba, and she grew up very, very poor in this little prairie town, and she goes to school, and it's a whole different life, and she ends up sleeping with the professor. And I remember my Canadian lit professor saying, "He's bonking students. You don't do that."
Well, that's good that he said that. Yeah. What's the name of that? I'll write that down. What's it called?
The Diviners.
The Diviners, okay. Sounds
by
interesting.
Margaret Lawrence. Margaret Lawrence was a Canadian author. She's pretty common in Canadian literature classes, but if you're not if you didn't grow up in the Canadian school system, you probably haven't read any of her stuff. But it's a novel about a writer, but it's much more realistic about writers' lives. I mean, she has bad jobs and works in a bookstore, like most writers do, right? So yeah, and it's my all-time favorite novel. So but yeah, she does.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's always worth a read. I just love it. But anyway, it's not even a horror novel, it's just one of my favorites. So what else are you working on right now?
Well, as I said, I've written some stories about job interviews and dates that I'm shopping them around, and I've gotten some encouraging rejection letters. So that's, I guess I'll keep going with that. I'm working on a story where this woman goes to lunch with a friend, an acquaintance, over and over and over again. And she doesn't really like her, and she doesn't know how to get out of going to lunches. And eventually she finds out that she's really in hell, and this lunch is never gonna end. But yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I have about half done, but I haven't got the hell part yet.
Oh, that's awesome.
We'll see.
Okay, we should probably wrap this up. What is there anything else you want to tell us about? Or I know you're right near ground zero with some of the protests. I hope you're staying safe.
Oh yeah, yesterday was kind of scary. I slept right near the door with all the lights on in the house, because we have a neighborhood sort of watchdog committee that put out a little memo. Everyone, turn your lights on and get your hoses ready. They said. And I don't have my hose hooked up. What are you going to do? Terrorists is coming to the door and you're going to spray him with the hose? So I just didn't follow that advice, but I did keep all the lights on. I'm going to do the same tonight. But yeah, it's right up the street. It's like a mile away from me. And it was so smoky the other day. My husband has lung problems and he was coughing all day. It was bad.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, stay safe.
Thank you.
Try to, it's not the protesters that are causing the violence. That's the scary part.
I know. It's just disgusting. This whole country is, oh God. You're lucky to be in Canada, really. Do you feel lucky you're in Canada?
I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, we have our own issues up here. I mean, there's some protesting going on because a woman fell off a balcony and her family saying that the police pushed her. So we're,
oh no.
Yeah, and so we've got our problems with racial violence. We just we're a lot more smug and we pretend it doesn't exist, right? And that's not right either. We try to, and I mean, that woman that called the cops on the man in Central Park there, Amy Cooper is her name. She's Canadian.
Yeah.
She is? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's a graduate of University of Waterloo, just down the street here, and she probably lived in one of those student houses. but yeah, so we have our problems. So I mean, I feel that I want to hope that our cops are somewhat better, but maybe they're not. I don't know. It's a tough situation.
Well, they've got to be better than the cops here.
I hope so.
Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, and I, honestly, I've always supported, I believe that most cops are just normal people doing their jobs, but it's the bad apples that make it bad for everybody else. And then, you get the cowboys and the guys cosplaying soldiers, and I don't know, it's pretty scary.
I know there should be more stories about that, actually. There probably will be now.
Yeah. But then, if you speak against the cop, well, then there's something wrong with you, right? You're the government or whatever. I don't know. But anyways, try to stay safe, and we'll wrap this up. You're welcome. Have a great night.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
You too.